Well, hello and thank you for joining me for another Alex on Tech and iTWire TV interview. I'm joined today by Jonathan Jackson, also known as JJ, who is the Director of Engineering APAC Japan at BlackBerry, and he's here to discuss the 2021 Annual Threat Report. So, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Alex. Good to be here.
Thank you for taking the time. Now, JJ, BlackBerry today is very different from the BlackBerry that most people would remember, which was when it delivered the world's best mobile email smartphones. But what does BlackBerry offer in 2021 to its global customers? And what makes BlackBerry different from other companies who would claim to offer the same sort of things?
Yeah, so I think it's a great question. Thank you, Alex. And BlackBerry's been on a very long journey, 35 years history. Everybody knows us from the original days of the pager, then onto the smartphone, and having email on your hip, basically. And we recognized a pivotal shift that we needed to do in terms of the hardware, and we went into the software and services business. So that pivotal shift started really with a number of acquisitions based in sort of 2013, 2014. I've been at BlackBerry for 8 years, so I've been through the whole journey with BlackBerry. And we've changed into a software and services security company focused specifically on endpoint security and cybersecurity services. Yeah. And that's where we start.
And for those who still want BlackBerry devices, they're still on the market from somebody else now, but they're still available.
That's right. We do license it to other vendors, but we don't have any hardware. We don't deal with hardware anymore. It's purely a software and services company today.
Yeah. Now, in February this year, BlackBerry released its annual 2021 threat report, and I'll include a link to it in the article that accompanies this video, and also the video's description on YouTube. But what were the major findings, and what impact did COVID have on the report this year?
Yeah, so the threat report this year, unsurprisingly, is extensive, right? We had a very, very challenging 2020 globally, not just here in Australia or in APAC. The COVID-19 situation from a pandemic perspective created a huge amount of challenges for organizations, especially around, obviously, remote working. Suddenly our whole workforce had to suddenly just arrive at home, right? And be productive and get things going. Some companies and some countries were very good at doing that, but some weren't so good at it. So we saw a massive increase in cyber-related activity, which is unsurprisingly because cyber actors are very unscrupulous in terms of being able to look at opportunity and to be able to develop threats for those. So the threat report really, for us, looking back on 2020, looks at some of the rising activities around things like advanced persistent threat groups, hacker for hire groups, nation state activities, ransomware as a service. So ransomware has been around, but ransomware as a service really took off. And I'll spend a little bit more time on that one because that's a very, very challenging topic. But we've also seen a number of additional threat actors coming in around some challenges with regards to things like the connected car, IoT, right? The explosion of endpoints has really led to this huge attack surface, which is now available for cyber criminals to really exploit, and they did a really good job of doing that in 2020. And we're going to have a very tough year going forward for 2021. And the threat report really goes into some of the tactics and techniques that have been used by organizations out there to steal data, to compromise credentials, etc. And we'll be looking at some of the, we've got some mitigation actions and things that organizations really should be looking at carefully in terms of their business going forward 2021 and beyond into the future.
Well, there's a stack of hot button topics and issues right there. But one topic I know that BlackBerry is talking about is the difficulty of securing connected vehicles. So what more can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so the connected vehicle is a very interesting space at the moment for BlackBerry. Some people may not know, but we are in 175 million cars worldwide. So BlackBerry software runs, in a car to protect that car, the infotainment system, ECU componentry, and a bunch of other activities.
That's on the QNX operating system, right?
Correct. That's on the QNX side of things. And the connected car I mentioned is a complex beast, right? It runs something like anywhere between 100 million lines of code, right? You've got multiple ECUs in that car, different computers needing to talk to each other. You've got braking systems need to be talking to steering systems, to Bluetooth monitors, to a whole wide range of different connected pieces. Not just the car being connected to the internet, but that car being able to get a lot of information from the internet, as well as obviously from what's happening within the car itself. So BlackBerry plays a significant role in certainly the tier one car manufacturing group, where we help them to really understand some of the complexities and the security elements of that connected car. Now, to give you some examples, okay, so we're all aware of, hijacking attempts of a car. So, a man-in-the-middle attack taking over, breaking the steering systems. Now, those are well-documented threats that exist, but we see lots of new emerging threats happening with a connected car. An example, which is a personal example, I recently was lucky enough to go up to Darwin for a holiday. I arrived in Darwin, got out of the airport, went to the car hire company. I won't mention who it was because it doesn't matter. Jumped into their car. I paired my Android phone at the time to that car system. And lo and behold, the previous owner who'd been in that car, his full contact list was still in the car. All his text messages, all his personal data was still listed in that car. Now, if I was an unscrupulous actor, that personally identifiable information could have been very, very interesting for me. So we're really looking at a number of different challenges that the connected car has to be able to ensure the security of people's privacy and their data. One of the other things we're working on at the moment is something they call the V2X and the V2C space. So V2X means vehicle to everything. So that's the car connecting and communicating with a myriad of other systems, as well as in-fleet or vehicle-to-vehicle communications. So one of the capabilities that BlackBerry has is being able to leverage a complex kind of PKI infrastructure. It's a certificate-based thing where we can allow for a car or a smart city to start looking at things like congestion management systems. So, if you are police or ambulance, you would have a specific module in your car which would allow you to change the traffic lights on your journey, for example. But looking at the security elements of that is obviously incredibly important. Other activities we're now working on is, things like secure software over-the-air updates. So no longer do you need to drive your car to the dealership to get an update to its management system. You can just do that over your home Wi-Fi network. Now, just imagine the security, constraints that need to be done around the trusting of the data that's being sent to the car to update that, right? So there are a lot of different elements here at play. And the connected car space is something, as we see automation in cars going forward, it's something that is going to continue to drive a lot of activity and growth for BlackBerry in that space.
Yeah, well, Kara Swisher from the New York Times was interviewing Tim Cook, CEO of Apple, only in the past week or so, and they were talking about how, the autonomous car is effectively a robot on wheels, and the QNX operating system and the hardware that you use will be the brains of a lot of those cars' future robots, in competition with what Apple is doing, with what Google is doing, with what Microsoft is doing. So this is going to be a hugely intensive space over the next few years.
It will be, and interestingly, we're seeing a lot of regulation coming into that space as well. So last year, the European Economic Forum got involved and announced something, I think they call it W.29, which is basically a set of frameworks which car manufacturers you have to adhere to with regards to the cybersecurity of that car. Is that car able to assess itself from a cyber threat perspective? Is it able to mitigate against attacks that happen on that car? And these are a set of guidelines which are being put in place for manufacturers that have to adhere to be able to sell their vehicles in a very complex cyber world. So it's interesting to see the compliance and regulation coming now into the connected car space as well.
Yeah. Now, with all the news about the SolarWinds and the Microsoft Exchange hacks, ransomware and more, how are you helping your customers secure their systems so they're as impervious as possible to these types of attacks?
So these types of attacks are what we call in the industry zero-day attacks, right? They attacks which don't exist yesterday, and then suddenly you wake up and your CISO is in a world of pain and your organization is really struggling to deal with a cyber event, right?
And they could have been, those attacks could have been in place for months with the bad guys rifling through your networks, as was the case with SolarWinds and the Exchange hack. So, it's not even 0 day, it's like minus 180-day attacks. It's incredible.
Absolutely. And I worked with a customer, I won't say the name again, but I worked with a customer last week on the Hafnium one anyway, where we did a forensic analysis of their data breach, and their data breach happened in February the 19th. It sat, dormant for a long time until obviously they had an exposure and they got us in to try and get it all fixed. It's a big, big challenge for organizations. One thing that we do at BlackBerry is we've invested in the last, when did we start? So 2017. So from 2016 onwards, we started looking at leveraging capabilities around machine learning and artificial intelligence, which allows us to be able to do prevention-based detection of things, so bad stuff. So what we've looked at is building mathematical models of known good and known bad. Now, these things might be malware, they might be ransomware, they might be viruses, but they could be other things like weaponized documents, or a fake invoice that is sent to you, or a fake mobile application. And we can use a mathematical model to be able to very, very effectively predict something bad happening on a network. So we use millions of different features to analyze files, for example, or other things. It might be scripts or memory control, and that provides us with, or our customers anyway, with a very, very strong way of preventing attacks before they occur. These, back to your SolarWinds and your Hafnium, if you were a BlackBerry customer, you would be protected from day one, because we have a predictive advantage of zero-day threats, which can exceed 18 months. So 18 months into the future, you're already being protected by the technology that is available today that we use, leveraging AI and machine learning. So it's a very powerful prevention first capability.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there was the news over the weekend of 533 million Facebook accounts being leaked to the web. So there's a potential for a lot of, identity theft and spear phishing. And fake websites that look as real as possible to try and capture more information from you. And then there was also the story of somebody who had 17 bitcoins or something stolen from their wallet through an app that got onto the Apple App Store, which was a fake app. And the second he put in his username and password for his Bitcoin account, apparently his life savings were stolen. So, I mean, the threats are coming from everywhere, and they're only getting more intense.
They are getting more intense. And I'm glad you mentioned mobile there, because not a lot of people realize how susceptible their mobile device is to attack. I often speak to customers and partners and say to them, your mobile phone is probably the last thing you look at when you go to bed at night. And it's very likely the first thing you look at when you get up in the morning. The amount of information we have on there is definitely interesting to cybercriminals. I've seen this year alone in 2021, 11 fake Android apps and 5 fake Apple apps, which we've now told to Google and to Apple to get off the store because they are credential stealing applications. Some of them were banking overlays. So there's a very nasty thing called a banking overlay Trojan. It's very easy to implement. It looks like a banking app. To all intents and purposes, it is a banking app, and customers install that. They've got a very clever way of bypassing some Android controls, which is something called the accessibility capability. And basically what it does, you would log in, Alex, on your device, you would, it asks for username and password. You just get a little pop-up saying, hey, we need to install this Google update thing. Everybody's going to go, yeah, that sounds fine, whatever. And before you know it, that has got an overlay Trojan on that device. Anytime you put in your credentials, whether it's banking or others, all of that information is stolen and sent to a command and control center somewhere else for somebody else to use. We're also seeing a proliferation of fake apps and fake personas, right? People stealing identities, and everyone knows that this stuff goes on, especially with the whole fake news thing. But this is now starting to move into a very challenging space with regards to deep faking of voice. So we're now starting to see the first threats emerging where people are stealing somebody's voice and being able to use that for nefarious purposes. So, they would steal your voice. You'd give me a call as the CEO, and you'd say, "Hey, Alex, JJ, I need you to transfer this invoice. Sounds like Alex, for all intents and purposes, is Alex." And I execute that invoice, and lo and behold, it's been your voice has been stolen by somebody else. Yeah. So these are very, very challenging times on mobile devices as well as other emerging threats.
Yeah, I mean it's a sophisticated form of the man-in-the-middle attack, and it's trying to take over a lot of the biometric safety that we once saw required in James Bond movies to have somebody's iris transplanted or something, but now it's science fact.
It is, and it's a challenge. I think. I mean, companies often ask me, what are some of the techniques that they can use? And obviously, user education is a huge one, right? We also talk about the insider threat, right? Just people doing stupid stuff. Or it might not just always be a malicious insider user. It might just be people clicking on links that they're not meant to. I had a very good example yesterday. So bringing it front to mind, a very good friend of mine is the CEO of a glass manufacturing company here in Australia. He called me yesterday and said, hey, I've just had an invoice from my glass repair guys who sent through the glass, and the invoice just looks suspect. So typically, I would be getting invoices from them in a DocuSign, digitally signed PDF document. This one has come through as a HTML document. That's very unusual. Can you just run it through your engine and just check if it's legit? And lo and behold, that absolutely was a weaponized document. Had he clicked on that link, it would have installed again an overlay Trojan, which was using something called RaaS as well as TrickBot. It's an evolution of a very nasty strain of ransomware capability called Emotet, which is driving everybody to despair at the moment. And had he clicked on that, his whole system would have been ransomed. Just one link.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's incredible how powerful and sneaky these guys have become. So, JJ, are there any customer success stories in Australia and the region that you'd like to highlight? I know you probably don't want to mention specific names, but industries and that sort of thing.
I mean, I think, we've done, from a BlackBerry perspective anyway, with prevention first, we've done very well working with customers to move them from what we would call the legacy AV sort of industry onto a AI and machine learning based prevention first mechanism. So some of them, we're talking now, the industry talks about the zero trust model. A lot of people talk about it. My competitors talk about it. And it's really, the zero trust model is really to just not trust anything. Everything needs to earn the rights to that piece of data, that application, the computer that you're using. So we've done very well with a number of organizations helping them move to that model. RaaS Group, the plumbing group is one to mention. They went from a traditional AV-based vendor, which is signature-based, very slow execution only, to this AI machine learning model, so prevention first. And that's been a very strong engagement for us and with them. We've also got the Sydney Opera House, which is a really good win for us, again, around that leveraging machine learning. But in this case, they actually need us for endpoint detection and response. So digital forensics, threat hunting, the ability to be able to look at what threats have come in, what have been executed, and be able to mitigate against those threats in real time. So, those would be, two really good customers. One other, which is a little bit different, is BPay, so the payments organization for Australia. They use us for data integrity. So they use us to ensure that the payments ecosystem is secure, and that everything that they do and they touch is authenticated and has a zero trust model for continuous authentication. So another, very interesting customer use case, but specifically around data integrity. So there are three for you, just off the top of my head. So.
Sure. And I mean, we've gone from reactive security to proactive security, and the whole zero trust thing has had to be enabled or implemented in a way that still makes it convenient for people to not have to go through the whole Windows Vista cancel or allow type of scenario that Apple made fun of all those years ago in its I'm a Mac and I'm a PC ads.
It's a good point, because the world has moved on in terms of our ability to implement protection on a user, so a person, on an app, on a mobile, or on a PC, or on a laptop, or an iPad, or a server, right? So we can no longer do that statically, creating signatures for stuff that we now know is bad, and then running an update to secure that because that's just too late. It's already been executed. So really looking at using AI to be able to do things in real time is kind of where we're at now, and that's where the industry is going to.
Yeah. Now, with COVID still causing issues around the world, and countries around the world going through new lockdowns again. I mean, here in Australia, we're pretty safe. You were talking to me before we started recording about how you're starting to go back to work a bit more often. But in parts of the world, I mean, it's still not the case, and or they've gone back to work and have had to come back again. So in addition to what you already said before about the lessons that BlackBerry learned about COVID, how else did BlackBerry itself accelerate its business, as so many tech companies experienced in 2020, and which is still happening today?
So, and it is happening today. You're you're right. We're very lucky in Australia. We are, quite digitally and technologically kind of advanced. We tend to be trenders, in that space. So take on new technology. So we were able to, effectively pivot to a work from home environment. But that's not the case across, the rest of my region. I've got customers in Indonesia, Singapore, India. I mean, one customer in India in March last year, end of February and March, phoned me up. So this is the CIO, and he said, I've got 4,000 people walking out of my building with desktops under their arms, literally carrying a desktop under their arms.
Yeah.
They have got to go home. They've got to connect it and plug it into something. JJ, what the hell do we do? Okay. And the challenge for them at the time was really looking at the scalability of their VPN infrastructure. That just fell to pieces because it had never been built to be able to manage, that sort of thing. So, people were not using VPN. They were turning on things like RDP, so remote desktop protocols were being turned on, which is basically opening the door to your infrastructure. It was a really, really big challenge. And I think, on the VPN side, it's interesting because anything that COVID's taught us, or one thing that taught us from a technology perspective, is that VPNs are 90s technology. They have got no more future in this world. We've got to look at securing data in transit outside of a hub and spoke model, which is effectively what a VPN is. Because what we're finding now is people are, and still today, they're working from home on a BYO laptop, for example, or their phone, and they're still connecting through to the corporate network via VPN, which is giving them a single throughput into the corporate infrastructure, unsecured or untrusted. And that's a really, really big challenge. So we've done, at BlackBerry, we have some work from home or digital workplace solutions to help customers very quickly scale up in a BYO mode. And we've been very successful in helping a number of customers do that. I look at now 2021, our planning is now, how do we continue to reduce the friction for end users, but still allow for looking at returning to work at some form. It's not going to happen anytime soon. Certainly, I've got customers, as I mentioned, Indonesia and even Japan as well. They won't be returning to work before the end of this year, if at all. So looking at reducing the friction for end users is really important. And that friction is just simple stuff. Okay, so it could be as easy as I log on at home on my corporate laptop, and I've got to put in a 16-digit password to access my corporate infrastructure or my email. That's just ridiculous, right? So having technologies in place, this kind of the zero trust model, where we're allowing users to, we know where you are, we know what network you're on, you log in every day at 8 o'clock and you log off at 5. So between those times, we're going to reduce your security so that you don't have to go through that overlay. But if something weird happens, so you're obviously working from home today, Alex, if somebody, came in and was able to access your data and something looked a bit off, so somebody was accessing apps that you don't typically access, or they start typing in a computer in a way that doesn't look like Alex, we've got mechanisms now to be able to build math models on that device to stop that and say, hang on, I'm not 100% certain you are actually Alex. Let's just challenge you with a multi-factor authentication, and you just prove who you are. In other words, prove to me that you still retain the right to this piece of information. So those are some of the things we're working now with customers on, and some of the things we're going to need to implement fairly quickly as we go forward in 2021.
And all of that has to be happening in real time.
It has to happen in real time because we're too slow as humans. There's no way that we can, the IT admin or the security officer can create a policy to say, all right, Alex, we're not too sure what's going on in your home PC at the moment. It looks a bit weird. We're going to need to push down a policy. That just takes too long. By then it's too late. So we do this all in real time.
Yeah. So as we get towards the end of the interview, I always like to ask the people that I'm speaking with, if you could please share a little bit about your own personal history in the world of tech.
Yeah, so personal history. I can go back a number of years. I'll probably give my age away a little bit, but I'd love to tell a story about my first computer, for example. So I think in 1986, maybe 1987, in South Africa. You can tell my accent is South African. I still retained it after all these years, although I've lived out of South Africa for a very long time. But my first computer was an Olivetti M19. And I always remember it because it was an absolute game. Yes, it had the green screen and all that stuff, but it ran It ran a
Olivetti version of DOS, I think, from memory.
CPU was 8 megahertz, and the RAM was 640 kilobytes. Game changer though was it had 2 floppy drives. Okay, and then so that was you could do disk to disk copying of data.
Yeah.
And then somebody was a game changer. There was the Olivetti M24, maybe the following year, had built a SCSI drive to pull one of the floppy disks out and put a 20 megabytes, I think at the time.
Yeah.
We made a hard drive into that, and that was just like that was a quantum leap in computing at the time. So, but yes, so since then it's been a wonderful journey in technology. I've worked with some amazing companies, mainly only Nokia and BlackBerry. So I spent 12 years at Nokia in security and mobility, which was amazing. And obviously for the last 8 years anyway, at BlackBerry, seeing a huge shift in technology capability. And I am a cyber guy. I'm very interested in security, and that's where my heart lands. So, yeah.
So from the past to the future, how do you see BlackBerry evolving over the next few years through to 2030, which I guess includes the evolution of all those cyber threats too?
Yeah, so 2030 is that's a way away. I think some of the interesting things that we're working towards now is just looking at the reality of quantum computing. That's going to be very interesting as we go forward, especially in manufacturing and smart cities and that sort of stuff.
But we're also going to need quantum computing to speed up our AI to become even more proactive against the bad guys.
We are. And one of the things that we recognize as a security vendor anyway, some of the threat research that we're doing at the moment is looking at how quantum computing is going to be used against us. So, for example, we know that the certificate-based and/or security controls that we use today on the internet are likely going to be able to be hacked by quantum computing in the not too distant future. So looking at new technologies and new security controls and mechanisms to be able to stop quantum computing from, for example, decrypting, encryption, solutions of cryptography that we've used for the last 8 years is probably not going to be good enough by 2030. So that's going to be a very interesting space. Obviously, AI is there. IoT, for sure. BlackBerry as a future gazing is definitely heavily invested in the Internet of everything. Everything we do is with AI and security. So that's a no-brainer for us to work in that space. And I think the other one, which we're very interested in, is the race to space. So, notwithstanding, clever Tesla being fully autonomous from a vehicle perspective, but really looking at where we now move in the space race and how that evolves by 2030. Maybe it's an achievable goal. It might not be, but it's certainly something that we're looking at in terms of, working with industry to look at what we need to do to really secure and be part of the table of the conversation with regards to space exploration, etc.
Yeah. Well, now that you mention that, is any BlackBerry technology used at NASA or on the International Space Station or on SpaceX? I don't know if you know.
It is actually. So yes, so NASA and International Space Station use BlackBerry software to secure very critical pieces of communication. We have an operating system or an OS, which is what we call an onion. So it's a microkernel operating system. Mm-hmm. So if a line of code within a portion of the operating system fails, it doesn't fail the whole stack. So you don't get your blue screen of deaths and all that stuff. So we can very quickly segment areas of an operating system to keep things going. And the one example of how I like to look at that is we do a lot of work in highly mission critical healthcare tools, right? So if you are having open heart surgery and the surgeon is currently digging into your heart with a machine behind him, that machine is running BlackBerry software for a very good reason.
Pretty amazing stuff. So my second last question is simply to ask if you could please share some of the best advice you've ever received in life to help you get where you are today.
Wow. Okay. So, best advice. I think for me, I'm a leader at BlackBerry. I've been involved in this security space for quite a long time. Best advice I ever received was from a mentor. He was actually at Microsoft, and he just said to me, "Just trust in your people." So I've always kept that as a mantra. Really looking at helping people, guiding people, mentoring them, and just getting them to be successful in their journey and whatever they do. And it's something I've always held dear to my heart, and something I hope I do day to day, just making sure my team and the people that I engage with, customers and partners alike, have the same sort of feeling. So, yeah.
So what's your final message to iTWire viewers and readers, and to your current and future customers and partners?
So, yeah, I think, hopefully we've covered a lot of different elements today. I think, you can tell from, certainly the threat report and the key findings that it is a very complex world out there. Don't lose heart. So any customer out there or partner who is, challenged by the realities of the industry they're working in today and some of the threats that are out there, I think, look for vendors who understand that space. Look to vendors who can help you have a decent conversation with making you more secure. To me, it's not about the product. I don't really care about the product. To me, it's about data and privacy. So my mantra has always been to secure your data and your privacy. So, for customers and partners in the future, if that's important to you, welcome a conversation, and we look forward to helping you in your journey as you go forward. So.
Well, Jonathan Jackson, JJ, BlackBerry's Director of Engineering, APAC Japan, thank you very much for your time. I hope we can talk again before the 2022 version of this report, and best of luck for the future.
We should definitely do that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.